But let's start with some introductions. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for letting us chat for a little bit. We're going to chat some more, but I am Garrett Sauls. I'm a content manager at InterWorks. And as I said, I work on the marketing team here at InterWorks. I work adjacent to a lot of data people. And Annabelle and Kund and I have been doing this series for a few months now, and it's been really life-giving and really interesting. But I'll pitch it over to Annabelle to introduce herself.
Yeah, of course. My name is Annabelle and Garrett. I'm living in Switzerland. I have 20 years experience in banking, 15 years in data and analytics. And in my last role, I was leading the Center of Enablement for a bank. I am convinced that enablement is the key of any data analytic platform implementation or digital transformation. And that's why we come up with Garrett with this great idea to have a new webinar series around enablement and and learn from the best in the market. So today it's a great honor to receive Emily Kund. Just to be very honest here, Emily is the reason why I got involved in the Data Plus Women initiative,
Incredible.
which is to promote women working with or on data, but also my interest in enablement and accessibility. Mm-hmm. And she's also a great sponsor about inclusion in general. And in the Data Plus Women initiative, we always quote her because she used to say that it's data plus women, not data minus men. Mm-hmm. So, I cannot think of any better person for our topic enablement for everyone today. Mm-hmm. So, and with that, I will let Emily introduce herself, I think.
It's a wonderful introduction.
I know. Thank you, Annabelle. I'm going to shrink you down and put you in my pocket so that when I need somebody to I'll just pull you out hologram or holographic or hologram Annabelle, here. But thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that introduction. So I'm Emily Kund. Actually, as Annabelle was providing her intro, I was like, wow, we actually have kind of a similar track in that my first career was spent 18 years in the federal government as a bank examiner. I like to say I grew up in banking. I started in banking when I was 15 years old.
Wow.
Doing customer service stuff, but getting to know the bank. And then after college, being a bank examiner, I did not consider myself a data person, though I used data all the time. And then through Tableau, actually, somebody in our office introduced me to Tableau, and I saw the potential. And that was the moment where I was like, oh, wow, this can be really impactful. And I just kind of fell in love with data visualization. And so now that's my second career. I pivoted from banking and bank examination to data and analytics and visualization and helping as many people as possible achieve their objectives, which to me, that's what enablement is. So I love enablement. I also value efficiency. So it makes sense that I love enablement because you can go faster when you are enabled.
I love that. This is a really common thing that I hear a lot in the data world. I feel like there are certainly people who go, well, these days now that there are actual data programs and stuff like that within universities, there are plenty of people who, they start out in that field and they continue in that field. But I feel like it is just as common to hear people like yourself, Emily, who started out somewhere else and then you kind of became the de facto, this person's actually good at numbers. You want to be the data person, and then that becomes your career, right?
So what was interesting was that I actually wasn't the data person. I was the person, I actually had a little circuitous path in that I was a business system administrator and kind of got to know data a little more. But what I did, because I was really busy with my day job, I would collect these resources. I would share out information that I knew. So I actually became the person known for enabling others. Ask Emily, she likes Tableau. She's active in that. She probably has a list. And I was putting on internal tugs like data viz competitions and I called it Design Skills to Thrill. It was Halloween.
Ooh, now that's marketing.
So yeah, I became known for that internally, and I just love doing that work. And so I did it for like the longest time, just for free, is like contributing to that community. And then it became a paid position, and here we are.
And how you did the swap between like doing that as a side job to really like become this enablement person and being recognized?
Well, it's interesting because so Red Hat was the company where I was paid as an enablement person, like that was my job. And I looked at the job description and sent it to a couple of my friends, a couple of trusted advisors, and said, hey, do you think I could do this? And they were like, Emily, like it has you written all over it. And so I was like, oh, okay. And I think that that's important for people to realize is to like two things there. One is like have your people that you can go to who are in your corner that are like, yeah, that's you, or, you know, maybe wait a minute. Or you might want to beef up on this before you go for it. But then the other thing too is work is work. It doesn't necessarily mean paid work. And so I became a resource in that Tableau community because I was doing things like blogging. I think I blogged for like 7 years straight. I did a podcast. Yeah. I did a podcast. Early on, I was doing data visualizations. I was having the conversations on Twitter at the time. And I was like, oh, for several reasons, started a virtual conference around the Tableau ecosystem. So I was doing all of these things. And that gave me the experience to then be well positioned for Red Hat when they needed an enablement person to help grow this center of excellence that was just founded.
And let's say if you will be working, I have often this question: if the post doesn't exist in your company, but you are the go-to person, and people always approach you for advice, for resources, for training, and something like that, how can you convince your boss that the position is needed?
Yeah, that is that's hard. I think the thing to do is to recognize that it might be hard. So I go back to to me, they're pretty like basic kind of guideposts. And not surprisingly, I also talk about them in data viz and accessibility, but like know your audience. So is that decision maker, are they into data and analytics? Like, are they more likely to be receptive to that conversation? Because if they're not, then I think you might have a harder time of having that conversation with them. So knowing your audience, understanding what kind of person are they? What are the company goals? Like, I know that this is all like, what does that have to do with enablement? But I will say, enablement is very hard to measure. And so as a result, and it's not a profit center. So it tends to be more of a cost center. So if you're going to somebody saying, we need an enablement position, and let's just ballpark it and just say like $100,000 or $125,000 a year for that position. So especially if there's any extenuating circumstances like hiring pauses or freezes. So now you're asking somebody to spend more money, and they are not going to actually be able to have this hard industry standard metric that they can say, oh yeah, this is totally worth it to us. So that's why and like, honestly, this is like, this is so meta. It's enabling yourself to have an enablement person by knowing your audience, by understanding what are their motivations right now. Can you tie it to business goals and objectives? If the business initiative or goal for the year is, look, we need to be more efficient. Well, cool. Let me show you how we can be more efficient. I also love, I love to quantify things if possible. So are they going to be exact? No. Could it be proxies? Yes. And so like, let's talk about, let's talk about it. I have this thing where I'm like, okay, 15 minutes can turn into 25 FTEs. And at first you're like, well, I'm like, how in the world can that happen? So if you have 500 developers and they spend 15 minutes a day researching, trying to find information, sort through all of that stuff. Okay, so that's probably a couple hours a week. And then think about the number of weeks in a year. Let's just call it 50 because you take 2 weeks off perhaps. So start to multiply that out. 15 minutes becomes 500 hours, which multiply that by, I forget the math, I have it somewhere, but it ends up being like 50,000 hours, or divide that by 2,000 hours for the work year. Mm-hmm. And then you get to 25 FTEs. So if I were to tell a decision maker, look, this is costing you the equivalent of 25 FTEs, full-time equivalents, full-time employees. They'd be like, that's crazy. And even if you're like, Emily, that estimate is cuckoo, like it would never, like people would never do that. Cool, half it. Cool, quarter it. Do you still have a convincing argument that, or are you setting up a convincing argument for having an enablement person? Because even if it's quartered, what's that? Like, mental math is not my great thing. Let's call it 6 people. Okay, what is the opportunity cost of those 6 FTEs? Is it innovation time, where from a data visualization perspective, because they're doing all of this research and trying to figure stuff out and banging their heads against the desk because why in the world can this not work when you could have set up something as an enablement person to help them? Could they have done innovation work where they're finding revenue, where they're identifying cost-cutting savings? Are they doing customer experience work? Are they getting business impact? Like, are they making their customers' lives easier? And as a result, making the company perform better. Mm-hmm. And so when you start to frame it up like that, again, knowing your audience, if somebody is not into the numbers like that, you might take a different tactic. But when you start talking about what is the opportunity cost and talking about it in like, this is it. And what is it costing you? Like, that's the other thing I do is to say, okay, so $100,000, like, even if it's 6 FTEs, like multiply that out. So what's kind of that, the opportunity cost of not doing that? What is it worth on the revenue side? What is it worth on these other things that you can do? And then you start to have a really good conversation around, this is how we can help. And this is how one enablement person. I was actually just having this conversation yesterday with Christian Langmeyer from Pyramid Analytics. And we were talking about enablement specialists and how, it can be a tough market. But what if you thought about it or talked about it in terms of being a product owner? Product owners, there's a really nice overlap between enablement and product ownership. Mm-hmm. And so could you then be a product owner? And could you be, or an enablement person for multiple platforms? If there is some resistance to being a full-time enablement specialist for just Tableau, Power BI, or whatever the thing is, maybe you're a general enablement specialist that can work on different things. And then it starts to become more, I think it really opens it up And so that you're willing to see how it can work for the company instead of just you. You're really thinking about everyone in the company and making the company perform better. I think when you approach it that way, if anything, you've planted the seed and you've gone to that person to say, and they know, oh, wow, like they've got their stuff together, like they're serious about this. And maybe the answer is no, not right now, but then you can be positioned for it later. So,
yeah.
Sorry, that was like,
no, this is all good. This is all good. I have thoughts. It's interesting, the things that I'm kind of picking up on. It sounds to me like, one thing kind of working backwards is there's multiple paths to this, or multiple paths to persuasion, right? In one sense, you can become that broad enablement expert and say, you know what, I understand we use several types of platforms and tools, and I know enough agnostically about these types of things and how to upskill users that I can get value beyond just being a Tableau analyst or Power BI analyst or whatever it might be, right? But there's also value in, depending on your organization structure, if you do want to truly become like, yes, I'm, de facto doing all the enablement things. Why don't I just slide into this product owner role and it kind of make it make sense and kind of, find a pathway find a path that way. Another thing that's really interesting to me that I really, really liked, and it speaks to the marketing mind as well, is the idea of opportunity cost, right? So often we want to frame things in the way of, well, if you let me do this, this is what the organization will get. Here's what we're adding. And that's good. That's positive language. But a lot of times, like you said, framing it in the way of, here's what we lose if we don't have someone who is dedicated to this in terms of time, effort, labor, or something we could be spending, something more meaningful we could be spending our time and resources on, right?
And Garrett, I think you will appreciate this as a marketing person. I learned something in a mastermind several years ago, which is people run from pain and run towards pleasure.
Yeah.
But I actually I started thinking about it a little bit differently in that I think people run from pain and they walk briskly towards pleasure. Because if you don't have pleasure, then it's like, okay, well, like, all right, so my life isn't great, but it's good. If you have pain, you're like, oh,
you feel it.
Fuck.
You're aware of it. Yeah.
I need to do something right now. That's a little Christmas story quote for folks. But like you're running from pain. And so bringing up that opportunity cost, I mean, I'm not talking about like fear-based marketing, but just having a really great conversation around, this is what it's costing us. Is that acceptable to you? Is that within your tolerance range? If no, great. Here's a potential solution. Let's talk about it.
For sure. I'm curious. So we have a question in the chat. We have one in the chat and one in the Q&A. I'm going to answer the Q&A one first because I think it segues a little bit, and I'm curious to hear your response as well. Sarah had asked, is there a difference between enablement and accessibility? And if so, what is the difference?
Yeah, great question, because I do actually think that they're tied. So accessibility is making something as available to as many people as possible. And that's basically, I think, what Microsoft uses as a definition for accessibility. So is it tied? Yes, because enablement is kind of like curating the resources and making them available to the users. And so that's how I would tie that together from just a pure like definitional perspective. If we're talking about accessibility and data visualization from like a design perspective, I think that there's overlap there between things like knowing your audience. Yeah. Like you need to know your audience for enablement, because you need to know the type of people who you are working with. Whether you do something more formal like personas, or you just go out and talk to people and say, okay, we've got people who are very engineering minded, who are also report developers, or we just have a lot of business users, and just being able to understand kind of the needs of those individuals, and then being able to curate the resources for that type of individual. Similarly, in accessibility and data visualization, knowing your audience, and then designing for what they need. And so those are some overlaps that I
Mhm.
see, but I answered it from a couple different ways just in case, you were thinking about
Yeah.
it in one of those.
No, I like that. I think it's important to. I know that there's a word out there that is used in terms of when we talk about like diversity initiatives and accessibility initiatives, like intersectionality, and thinking about the intersectionality of not only a person's abilities, things like whether they're colorblind or whether they have anything like that in terms of making it accessible, whether they need a reader or anything like that, but there's also what their role is. There's also where they're at. There's also I mean, you name it. There's so many little different variables that can factor into what is true accessibility when we start to broaden that definition. And I think to your point, it's important to think of it from multiple angles, like this kind of quantum threaded sort of thing.
Oh, that's very fancy. There is this principle in accessibility called solve for one, extend
Mm-hmm.
to many.
Mm.
I was just having this conversation actually this morning where you can solve for one person, and maybe that's the person with the accessible need.
Mm-hmm.
And like you can think about it. And actually, I used myself as an example. So I'm a late diagnosis ADHD person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been very life-changing and just in how I approach things and all of that good stuff. But how I would design and how I ask people to design for me is different now than 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started to think about like, okay, but I'm the same person and it's not like ADHD just like happened.
Yeah.
So what's the difference? And so as I was thinking about this, I'm like, oh my gosh, solve for one, extend to many.
Mm-hmm.
So solve for me, the me now of, oh, she has ADHD. We need to like make this whatever. But then the me of 10 years ago was super busy. Like there were days where meetings were 8.5 hours out of 9. I was, in addition to work, I was doing fitness competitions and I was doing long distance running and I was doing Tableau stuff. I was really busy. So I did not have time to like sort through this really great, beautiful, like intricate data visualization. No, I don't have time for that. Give me the number so that I can move on. And so I'm like, oh, that's great. Because you solve for the ADHD person. It extends to the person who doesn't know that they have ADHD or the person who is just busy because their life runs. And then, or the example I like to use is the manager in a meeting who just needs the KPI and be able to talk about it, speak to it in a meeting and be able to quickly look down and say, oh, it's 7.6. And that's what I love is it is that inclusive design because, and I think about accessibility like super user-focused design. Because sometimes you know and sometimes you don't. And, I think it's all about like designing for people and helping them do what they need to do. Make their life better. Like that's what I always go back to. Can I make the life better?
I really like kind of reframing it holistically as like user-based design and user-based thinking because I feel like there's a lot of that accessibility and if you're truly thinking about your users deeply and broadly, those accessibility things are going to be not necessarily baked in, but easier to find, easier to uncover and apply.
Yeah, and I would also say, I think some accessibility experts will say you've got to include the people from the beginning. That is ideal state. But what about the people who don't know?
Yeah.
Or what about the people who don't have psychological safety in their organization to raise their hand and say, hey, I actually have this. I mean, because maybe they're considered a widget. They're replaced. And so I think ideally, yes, bring them in. But if you just focus on this is user-centered design, and it doesn't matter whether you have an accessibility barrier or not, because it's being designed for you.
Yeah, right.
Same with like how you develop your enablement content. Like You know, when you're developing the newsletter, don't put like a block of text because
that's general
I'm not
best
gonna read
practice.
it.
I don't care who you are.
But just like to rebound on one of your sentence, Emily, I remember, you know, I try in previous job to apply the best practice and say, hey, do that and that. Please don't do like the traffic light color, like we were being told.
Yeah.
But I receive a lot of pushback on that. I say, but guys, it's the best practice. And people told me, yeah, but everyone is capable of make the distinction between green and red. I say, no. And I managed to convince them when I discovered that in the board of director, 2 people were colorblind. And then when I put this argument, you know, there were no discussion whatsoever, and we apply the best practice. So sometimes it's like,
Yes. And I will say my experience has been that the higher up in the company, again, depending on the type of company, if there is not that psychological safety, the higher up you get, the less communicative people will be about any perceived weakness or any issue. And Annabelle, I had the same, a similar experience where we changed the color palette to one that was colorblind friendly. And somebody came to me afterwards and was like, oh my God, thank you so much. Because I would just be in the meetings. And this was like with senior leadership. I would just be in the meetings and just nod my head. But now I can actually like understand it. And because they couldn't, like, they weren't going to say anything. And then they would go back later at their desk and like figure it out. But I'm like, yeah, like, let's just do that.
I think there's something to be said too for individuals. We talk about psychological safety too, and there are some individuals as well who are just like, even if they feel somewhat psychologically safe, they're like, oh, I don't want to bother anyone. I don't want, I need to make a big deal about it. If everyone else can read it, don't worry about me. I think a lot of people, especially Midwesterners, can have a tendency to be like, don't worry. Yeah, it's fine. But I think that is, again, I think this goes back to the value of having an enablement person who can ask these questions and have these conversations. And again, do the user focused design and user based thinking to say, well, what you are experiencing does matter. I do care about that. Let's talk about it. And if we have the bandwidth and ability to do it, which is not a difficult thing to do, we can do it, So convincing people that even those small things matter, Now, I say small things. For some people, it's a very big thing. But for people who view it as a small thing, those small things matter.
Yeah, 100%.
I'm curious. So this is kind of, I'm going to answer this question because it was asked fairly early on by William McCann Murphy. And this maybe has to do with a little bit of, I almost want to say, maybe it's ease for developers or dashboard builders, but it could also be ease for people and analysts, people who are interpreting it as well. But William had asked, what is the panel's view in creating a design language for visualization to simplify data interpretation? So curious your thoughts on that, specifically what that might mean.
Okay, so if I'm interpreting the question correctly, I am in the camp of plain language, simple, consistent. I actually think, and I wrote this somewhere, I have no idea where, I think we actually do a disservice to our community, or we can be a disservice to our community if we like to label every little thing. This is going to be super embarrassing, but I'm going to admit it anyway, because it wasn't a thing until I was like, oh. So I, for the longest time, was like, oh, this is a bar chart. Oh, this is a bar chart. It's just laying on its side. And then people started calling this a column chart and this a bar chart. And I was like, oh. Because when I started to first see column chart, I was like, well, like, what's the difference between that and a bar chart that just stands up straight? And so from a user perspective, I was like, oh, crap. Is this something new I have to learn? And so like when we start labeling things, when we start getting too into the weeds because we know it and we know that there's a difference, I think that actually can be a bit of a disservice to our users So, because like, who really, like, is it a bar that's up, that's horizontal and
Yeah.
vertical? Yeah. And I'm like, that's a super simple example. Like, I don't know, a bee swarm, or like there are others where it's similar names. But just even some of that, I think, just adds to the cognitive load,
Yeah.
adds to the person's processing challenge of like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so they're saying that this is this, and now I have to learn about what that is. And instead, what we should really be doing is focusing on what is the objective of the data visualization? Is that objective being conveyed? And is the person getting what they need from it? And so I'm not sure that I like fully answered your question, but I really like plain language items.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I take a look at it. And yes, and then you can weave in some of that. I call it chart literacy, or data literacy. You can weave that into your content, enablement content, training, and that can help people feel a little more comfortable. Like even with training, when I would say, I don't know, like, oh, this is called this. You may have also heard it as this. And so it just helps. And it's like, a little like drop down. So it's not like in somebody's face. So somebody's like, well, duh. But if you're like, oh, do you need more? Do you want to learn more? And then they can like look into it and like get the information they need in order to feel comfortable and confident in looking at the data visualization. So that's my thoughts.
No, I like that. I will tell you, I will come clean. I did not know that there was a difference between bar and column charts either. So I just learned another thing today. But I think to your point, this does speak to something, because I would argue the vast majority, particularly of business users, probably don't know what it's called. They know what it looks like. They know what they want to see. It's one of those things where it's like, or like if you were to ask a business user, make me, a Sankey diagram, like, I mean, I'd have to think about that. I have to do some Googling before I could say that. And that's what's interesting, right? Is using that natural language. And this is a thing I feel like, especially particularly with like AI tools. Like we talk about Tableau Pulse, or we talk about things with like natural language search, natural language generation, and stuff like that for finding reports and stuff. This is a thing that matters. This is a thing that people are asking about. So I think there is something to using natural language, and B, destigmatizing that. Because sometimes when people are like, oh, actually it's called a column chart. If it's not a column chart, it's not from the column region of France or whatever, right? It's like, it's
not champagne.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of adds like a little stigma of like, oh, I'm not smart enough to understand this, so therefore I'm not smart enough to ask a question of the data or whatever.
You need to be inclusive.
Sorry.
No, you need to be inclusive to other people, right? You cannot like enable them.
So there's a couple of things that I want to share. One is I share a lot of personal experiences, not because I'm like, look how dumb I have been, but because those are lived experiences. And I feel like if I can share that, then maybe it helps somebody else go, okay, yeah, so it's not just me. So that's why I share some of these things. There's a couple of points. One is, on the lived experience thing. I was in a class on interest rate risk management, as one is, and they provided us a graph. Now, this was before my time in data, and so I was just a business, a bank examiner, learning like how to interpret this data, this information, so that I could ask questions and do whatever. They were like, okay, look at it and tell us what you see. I was so overwhelmed. I did not know what they were trying to do. I think it was kind of like a scatter plot, but then also had some lines. There wasn't anything really labeled or legends. I was at the table with people who knew interest rate risk. So I was there with experts. And I will never forget, like, I know who was sitting to my right. I know I'm pretty sure I was in Chicago in the Chicago
Core
Learning
memory.
Center.
Yeah.
Like I know everything about like that experience. And
Mhm.
I remember thinking, oh my God, I thought that I was a reasonably smart person. I do not understand this at all. And so then I started to doubt myself more because I'm like, I shouldn't be in this class. I don't know interest rate risk. I'd like just give up my national bank certification and like I just need to go back to like super basics. And why am I here? A chart made me feel that way. Now, do I
Mhm.
have, was there some issues on my side? Yeah. But the point is that charts intentionally or unintentionally can do that.
Mhm.
And so, the things like labels and legends and just some of those things can help us or help users, people understand what's being conveyed. Because if
Mhm.
somebody were to tell me, oh no, this is how you read it, or this is what this, just like those little things, I would have felt so much better. And
Mhm.
yes, I would have been like, oh, I didn't quite get that, but like, okay, now I can learn.
Mhm.
Instead of feeling that dread. And of course, when you're in a class, people are going to, an instructor is going to call on you. I was like anxious for that. I was like, please do not call on me because you will learn, you will figure out how dumb I am.
Yeah.
And so it was like just feeding that imposter syndrome. Um, so that was something that, I wanted to share because like how we develop, what we say, all of those little things
Mhm.
can really affect a person's experience.
Yeah. There's a concept in that I learned pretty early on in one of my marketing and PR internships for when I was working for the city of Stillwater here in Oklahoma. And my boss at the time, she had said, and this is not an insult to your audience at all, but it's just when you're writing press releases and press materials, assume the audience knows nothing. Assume the audience knows nothing and do that inverted pyramid of information, leading with that most important information and provide that context and then go into further detail. But don't assume they know what an acronym means. Don't assume they know who this person is just by
Yep.
their name or this location or this building or this initiative is, because there's a fair chance that some of them don't. So to your point, all those labels, all those additional context dialog boxes, right? The little exclamation point to hover for more
Yeah.
information. That stuff is very useful, very very useful.
Yep. I love it. Expository writing style, I think is what that's called.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. More language.
All right.
I have a question,
Okay.
Emily. That's I really want to ask you. It's kind of A or B, you know. Are
Okay.
you a style guide or template team?
Mm.
Ooh. I love both. Um, I actually have this thing where I'm a nerd, fully own it. I value efficiency because time is our most finite, it's a finite asset. We're not going to be able to make more of it. And so how are we going to use it? How can I like get what I need and go and do whatever? Um, so I wholeheartedly believe that guidelines or style guides are amazing. They are great only because, or if only because, depending on how it's developed, you are giving people the guardrails. And whether we'd like to admit it or not, people actually like to know what the guardrails are
Mm-hmm.
for working because they know, like, oh, if I go out, there might be a consequence. Or, hey, this guide was written this way, but applying some critical thinking, I know that this is my example. So I know, like, it's that bend versus break. Part of it's how you develop it, how you have communicated it. But I really love those because then the developer doesn't have a bunch of questions. They know I can look at this thing. I know what size it should be. I know the color palette. I know padding. I know all of it. I know where to put my filters or whatever. And so then it's just a matter of focusing on the charts and the data and providing that information for people. So that's why I love it. I love, going to be crazy that a former bank examiner says this, but I love documentation, but only the level of documentation that you need, not like a crazy amount. But when you don't have any, then again, you're wasting your time. Like you're searching for stuff, you're having conversations that could really have been answered by putting together a one pager or a style guide. So yeah, I get back to, if I have to figure it out as a developer, and let's pretend I make like a ton of money, like if I, like, is it worth it to the company for, okay, in this example, I make like a ton of money, like $300 an hour. Is it worth it to the company for them to waste $300, $600, $900 for me to figure it out? Multiply that out and you can start to see. And so that's why I like it.
That's really interesting. I'll say too, as working with designers, people who create brand style guides and stuff like that, that I think there's this idea that style guides and templates need to be like this very officious, I'm talking like polished sort of thing. But I have seen iterative style guides, if we do a rebranding, even before we get an official thing, who doesn't want an official, nice looking document? Of course. But style guides as simple as a fig jam with like, here are the brand hex codes, for now, and you can do this, or even in Slack, here's a pinned message with this. It's kind of this idea of start somewhere, and hopefully you get some feedback and iteration. Someone says, could you put this in a PDF? That'd be really helpful. Could you send an email communication about this and so on? That'd be really helpful. But you never know until you get started, right?
And that's so important. It actually reminds me of something that I'm experiencing right now, which is I'm helping a group with a style guide. And at first I'm like, okay, like let's provide as much as possible in this so that people don't have to guess. And then as I started getting into a new tool, because the organization is going to a new platform, I was like, ooh, okay, so I think it's going to be like, we need vertical padding of 20 pixels, but I don't know, like in some cases it looks like 15 has been fine or 25 has been fine. And so do I really want to say in the style guide, you should have a 25 pixel padding? Well, I don't know that to be true. So could we, as we are moving to this new system, could we test out the style guide, like you're saying, Garrett?
Yeah. And
then have people provide feedback, get some seasoning with the new tool so that you can go, oh yeah, this consistently looks like 20 pixels or 30 or whatever. And then you can iterate on the style guide and go, okay, so now we're getting a little more formal. And that to me makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. I'll say chat. I can't believe it already. We're 7 minutes out on the hour, which is great. Time flies when you're having fun. But if you do have any questions, chat, please feel free to ask them. We will just continue talking otherwise until the end of the hour. But I just want to make a quick reminder too for people that this is being recorded and this will be emailed out within a day or two, likely. So if for whatever reason you want to watch back, you want to share it with someone, and of course it'll be posted to YouTube. But feel free to get your questions in while you can. I'm just going to keep talking. So,
Emily, is there anything else that you want to add?
Yeah.
Oh,
we have 1 hour.
I know we only have 7 minutes, so I'm trying to think about. Oh, yes. Okay. So I would like to talk about adoption, a little bit about value. I want to really touch on those for like a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
And then if somebody has questions, like we'll just like park whatever I'm saying and I'll answer those.
Okay.
Okay. So for adoption, like let's say you're implementing a new training program and you want people to enroll in it because it costs some money, either in FTE time, your resource time, or like actual money. And so how can you do that? as we've learned, I love marketing. And so one of the things that I try to do is put together a launch, like super simple. I'm not talking about something really crazy, but put together like a launch list of like, okay, here are the activities I want to do. I want to hype it up because like if you're not excited about your product, nobody else will be either.
Yes.
And so what are the things I can do to get people excited? Part of this depends on your organization. I know I'm flying, but and I'm happy to have conversations after to dig in more. But part of it is like, okay, what can you reward them with? Like, is it badging? Is it like bucks or whatever?
Yeah.
Like, what can you do to help get people into your program? And then webinars are amazing for several reasons. One, you get to show them what the experience can be like. One of the things I absolutely love, and I took this away from my experience that I was in, was this concept of the fear of missing out, actually. And so I'd be on a webinar because you are selling something, even if it's not costing the person something, because it's their time that they're taking to do this program or to read the whatever. So for the training, what we did was at the end, we would say, okay, so because you attended this webinar, you get early access to the program. You can sign up now. Here's the link. When you have signed up, when you've enrolled in the program, I want you to drop your name in the chat because I want to celebrate you that you have made this commitment to improving your skills. And so Sally might say it, and you're like, congratulations, Sally. Oh my God, I hope you love it. You can call us anytime with questions. Oh, look, Ojo, you're gonna love it. Okay, and then you keep saying the names, and then it becomes this like, oh, well, everybody else is doing this. I should probably sign up. And then you follow it up with emails, like I have a whole thing. So I love that because it creates excitement. It creates this like, oh, I don't want to be the only one who doesn't improve their skills. So there's that. The other thing before I get to value real quick is your product, whether it's a data visualization, newsletter, training program, whatever, it is the plane. Okay. It's the plane from that pain to pleasure island. You are actually giving people a transformation, and people may not be receptive to hearing that like woo-woo type of thing, but that's what you're doing. You are taking people from, I don't know where to start, I'm confused. You're taking them from confused, without clarity, and your thing is providing them confidence. Your thing is providing them to, do whatever they need to do. And so when you recognize that and recognize that you're helping you're transforming people at their job, work at their jobs, that's really powerful. And so it's never about the plane. Like, who cares if we're in a 787 or a 777? We want to know, we want to go from here to here.
Yeah.
Communicating that really effective because people go, I feel seen because, yeah, I feel confused. Oh, no, I don't feel confused. Amazing.
That's so important.
And then value, we talked a little bit about it. I have this methodology that I kind of tweaked from marketing. I call it FARM. It's frequency, audience, recency, and monetary. And so for dashboards, you can adapt this to really whatever, but are you, like, how frequently are people using your product? And you can base it on as expected, like what was the expectation? How frequently are they doing that? Audience, who is the audience for it? How, like, getting to know that audience and making sure that, yeah, it's up when it needs to be up for that audience. Recency, how recent have they been in the dashboard? Every tool has these metrics, at least from the admin side. So it's just a conversation around, hey, can you like share this out to me? If they haven't been in there for 180 days and the expectation or the general thought was that they were going to be in there every month, you got something to follow up on. And then from a monetary perspective, you can do some, there's like a little more. That's a little harder to do.
Yeah.
But you can do it, or at least get a proxy. But even if your dashboard comes back and it's like, ooh, there's very little value here, it's not the end of the world.
Mm-hmm.
You can have a glow up by having conversations with your customers. That's an opportunity for your dashboard, or for you. If the dashboard needs to be sunset, you can say, hey, I identified this. Where can I be put on higher priority work? Mm-hmm. That shows that you are a self leader. That is always valued. Mm-hmm. And then, wait, I think I got everything. Okay.
That was fantastic. I love it. Well done. So if both of you have a minute, we'll answer this final question, because I think it's kind of a good cap, and maybe we can broaden it as well. But do you have any suggestions for good resources on plain language, especially around data and data visualization? So is there anything out there that's kind of like that you've seen, whether it's on LinkedIn, a person, a blog, anything where you're like, they're speaking my language, literally?
I believe WebAIM has something, webaim.org. Mm-hmm. I believe they have something on plain language, because I was looking it up the other day. I think about knowing your audience. What's plain language to them? What does that mean? But then also, I think there are little things we can do. Like, we don't have to be fancy all the time.
Yeah.
I love being fancy, but we don't have to utilize things. We can use things. And so you can catch yourself doing some of that when you talk about concepts. Like, I said cognitive load. I'm like, because I know what that is. But like, then I reframed it as, oh, your brain's processing power. Mm-hmm. So I would start with WebAIM. I will look it up though, because I want to see like what else is out there, because it is a super important point.
Yeah, I'm curious as well. So I will share this last slide just so people know. Again, I'm curious, is there a best way, Emily, for people to get in, if they're looking to follow you or anything like that? Is LinkedIn that place? You have a blog, anything you want people to know about just to kind of stay up to date?
Yeah, so first of all, I love connecting with people. I love having these conversations. If you can't tell, I just love it. Like, I geek out on it. LinkedIn is the best place to reach me, to just message me there. I do have a website, emilykund.com, where I try to blog occasionally. Right now, I'm actually moving up the pipeline. So I'm starting my journey and sharing my journey about SQL and Python. And actually putting my SQL learnings into a way that makes sense to that everyday analyst. Speaking of everyday analysts, I started a newsletter on LinkedIn because I just so strongly, I started it, I guess, last year maybe. I feel so strongly about that everyday person who's not the data person, who's not whatever, and helping them, because they just are trying to do their job. Right. And so you can always subscribe to that. I put out a newsletter. I'm going to aim for monthly, just so that I don't like overwhelm myself. But yeah, and I think you can see like former or past issues. I try to talk about everything from, like, if I were a COE of one, I have some accessibility stuff. This last one was on KISS people, keep it simple, sweetie. And that users are actually people. And so anyway, I just try to help people, the everyday person. So
I love that. Well, it's very apparent. And I mean, I really do appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom with Annabelle and I, because I mean, it's immense. I mean, it's funny because I had known your name in the Tableau community for years and years and years and years. And so it's very cool to like get the chance to actually talk to you and do that and see that come to fruition, because I mean, yeah, what you put out there is very valuable and very useful, and you should be proud of it. So thanks for what you do.
Thanks. And I would encourage anybody to like do that type of thing. Because, like, I will never forget. I know we're like over time, but for the replay folks or people that are hung on.
Exactly. Yeah.
I remember that I wrote something and then like repeated it at a conference maybe, where I said, dashboards are like accessories. And Coco Chanel once said, before you leave the house, look in the mirror and take one accessory off. And you can do the same thing with a dashboard. Like, look at it and see what you can take off. And somebody said to me, I have never I've never seen it talked about that way before, but I love it because I love accessories. And so my point being is that you can infuse yourself into your writing, into your style, because you never know like how people will feel seen and heard because of how you communicate. And so like, even if like I'm starting my journey with pyramid analytics, and so like I need to be cloned so I have enough time to write this, but writing my learning so that people can understand like, oh, I've come from this background and here's what I had struggles with, or here's what I love. And just to help people, like we all can connect with others in how we communicate.
Absolutely. That's fantastic advice for sure.
Thank you all for having me. Like I love this so much.
Too. I know we need like parts 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I mean, we're gonna have a whole universe.
You will be reinvited in some
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, cool. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you so much to both of you for joining. And again, people, you can catch this. We'll be emailing this out, and it'll be live on YouTube probably within the next week, next few days, sort of thing. So stay tuned for that. And with that, I'll say good day and good evening to Annabelle.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for coming. Bye.